Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast that celebrates the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And for season 2, we are diving into the film Blazing Saddles, one Laurel and Hearty. We are diving into. Okay. We are diving into the film one Laurel and Hearty handshake at a time. I'm your host. I'm Alan Sanders.
I am your co-host, Walt Murray.
And joining us again from the West Coast, we have Professor Robert E.G. Black. Robert, thanks again for being part of this podcast.
Glad to do it.
We're going to continue this minute here on this Tuesday, the 2nd of April, with the orchestra still playing in the middle of the desert. We've got the Count Basie Orchestra wrapping up as Sheriff Bard is slowly now walking away from camera, continuing across the desert. And when we end this minute, we are actually in the middle of the welcoming committee in downtown Rockridge as the band strikes up to play, and the song they're playing is a song called Hoop-de-Doo, specifically written for Blazing Saddles. So let's go ahead and just dive right into it. All right, so Walt, I'll go straight to you on this. As we start off the minute, we are wrapping up with Count Basie's cameo appearance in the movie and shows Bart now having gone already past him and riding away as he continues to make his way through the desert.
Well, there are a lot of questions that I have to ask with this because where are they? If he's doing kind of a pass by, they really are out in the middle of nowhere. They're not on the edge of town. They're not anywhere. They're just out in the middle of the desert.
They truly are in the midst of nowhere playing for no one in particular.
Yeah, is that their rehearsal area or well, anyway, I guess we're never going to mine the mind of Mel Brooks on that one, but that's some awesome scenery that he rides off into.
But yeah, it's not about the band being there. It's about, though this is a comedy, it's constantly doing things that invoke Westerns generally, and the hero, like, striding into town on his horse is a big one, and being out in the middle of nowhere. So you get that scene, but then as a joke, the ambient music turns out to be incidental. Or, wait, is that ambient? I think I mixed up my terms. The soundtrack music is actually there.
We'll go with ambient. Nobody's going to question you.
I think ambient and incidental are the same thing.
It sounds important. He's impressive.
Well, until someone...
Well, we got ourselves a smart fella here.
And until somebody starts their minute-by-minute breakdown of our podcast, nobody's going to worry about the term.
See, Robert, we weren't blessed with an abundance of schooling growing up. We had to kind of make our way the hard way.
That may be evident to everyone. The Georgia public school system, huh?
Here on the 27th episode, they know.
They are very well aware of a public education on display. Right at 8 seconds, rather than a dissolve, which Mel Brooks has used a lot throughout much of this, the first 20 plus minutes of this movie, we actually get just a cut to, and we are in the midst of downtown Rockridge, and someone has literally pulled out a welcome sheriff banner to put on a dais where it looks like some of the select committee of the town is there. We've got Reverend Johnson. We've got Howard Johnson. We've got
Orland Johnson.
Is that? Yeah, that's Samuel Johnson is also up on the
Pippi
dais.
Johnson, Larry Johnson.
You could just say Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson.
Bing Johnson, Betty Johnson. All the Johnsons have arrived today.
Frankie Johnson.
Cleotis.
Yeah, in my notes, I lost track of the Johnsons. One of them, I'm just like, question mark Johnson? I don't know.
And there's little Johnny Johnson to the left.
So you've got people tying up streamers in this, and you've got a bunch of people dressed like they're getting ready for a rendition of The Music Man and getting ready to play 76 trombones.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, how big is this town that they have a full marching band?
Well, they strike up the band.
This town was actually founded by a retiring marching band, so they just always have one.
They were looking for a noisy little town in the middle of nowhere to retire to.
That's why Count Basie practices nearby. It's just the area.
This is where all
Very
the musicians
acoustically
go
friendly.
to practice, so nobody else can find out what they're about to play, so nobody can steal their music.
Well, that would make sense.
And the railroad's going to ruin it.
Well, it's got the name Rock in the title.
Yeah,
I guess
very
that's where
true.
music's played. Hey, man, we're going to Rock Ridge.
Now, do they have this welcome sheriff banner because they lose a lot of sheriffs?
I was wondering that because it does seem like they went to a lot of trouble for a new sheriff. So,
Like, it almost needs an extra visual gag, like a bullet hole in the sign itself or some blood spatter. Like, they've used this before.
yeah, part of it burned.
Somebody go dig up the welcome sheriff sign. We need another one.
They just keep it out there and roll it up every once in a while. Unscroll it about once a month. Well, Alan, didn't you say that in the script they actually had the killing of the past sheriff?
Yes, they did. During that montage of the sacking of Rock Ridge, during the Ballad of Rock Ridge being sung, the sheriff comes out and actually says that line, "What's all this? What's all this?" And he gets shot. He goes, "Oh, that's what this is," and falls down dead. But they never included that in the montage of the shots for the final theatrical release.
Yeah, that may have been a little dark for this.
A hair, considering the next time we see somebody getting shot or something getting shot, the bullet can't penetrate the hat. It can't penetrate the glass. It can't penetrate.
Yeah, true
it
enough.
Just stops. So, yeah, I don't think we only see. I think we only see one person physically get killed via gunshot, but that doesn't happen for a long time.
Yeah, it's we got a while.
All right, well, we got Olson Johnson shows up, and he does have a line here that does match the script, because just as you hear people sort of talking about getting things up, get the flags up, the sheriff will be here soon. Actually, Olson Johnson comes running up saying, "Just got a telegram from the governor's office. Sheriff will be here at noon." Now, how did they know when Sheriff Bart was going to arrive and he's on horseback?
Math.
Okay, next question. So, but I mean, think about it. You're on horseback. I don't know how long it takes to ride. And, when you're stopping to pose for the camera at one point, show off your Gucci bag, look at the sunrise or sunset or wherever you happen to be staring off before riding past Count Basie. I mean, I guess it was just a general sometime around noon.
At best, it feels like realistically they might know what day, but then they'd also have to be prepared for the fact he might never show up because he just got like something happened to him on the way. But yeah, noon's a little too specific.
It is very specific, but I guess it gets the whole town out at the same time.
Well, and we don't know how long the ride is from whatever the capital of this crazy state is. So it may have been like a 30-minute ride.
The filming locations are just 15 minutes apart. So they're like, he left 15 minutes ago. He's about to get here.
Yeah. So probably 30 minutes on a horse. He's got to stop for the concert. So that adds a little bit of time.
We've got another anachronistic reference coming up here when Howard Johnson suddenly says, "Noon, I better rehearse my speech." And then gives himself as honorary chairman of the welcoming committee, "Is my privilege to extend to you a laurel and hearty handshake."
Are you saying they hadn't invented the handshake yet?
The joke being he's got a laurel in his hand and he's going to give him a handshake, but you've got Laurel and Hardy as a reference, which would be really difficult that anybody would, that he would know that Laurel and Hardy was around, because Stan Laurel wasn't born until 1890 and Oliver Hardy wasn't born until 1892.
Yeah, so Stan Laurel was designed in 1889 and Oliver Hardy. And ironically, Oliver Hardy's from Georgia. From the
Why is that ironic?
metropolis. Well,
because that's where we are.
two of the three
It's
of us.
only ironic to us.
Yeah.
It's more coincidental than ironic then.
It's anachronistic, right?
Walt doesn't necessarily know the grammar. He just sort of dabbles in grammar.
Yeah, I throw words out there and make them mean what I want them to. So, I'm what they call a word psycho, or at least
Just
I
hope
call
it makes
myself
sense
that.
to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. So
You remember the cartoon of the Tasmanian Devil? That's Walt going through a grammar book.
I do to grammar what Godzilla does to Tokyo.
Oh, God. Okay, we'll go with that. This actually always, as a kid, made me laugh, the whole pun of Laurel and Hardy welcome. And I actually say Laurel and Hardy, Hardy, but according to the script, they actually spell it as a laurel bush, Laurel, and then they spell it as hearty, as an Hearty, a hearty handshake. So it comes off orally as the gag of representing the two comedians, Laurel and Hardy, but even in the script they wrote it Laurel and Hardy, meaning like lowercase l for a laurel bush or laurel branch, and Hardy meaning a grip, a handy grip, very meaty, hearty.
So it just is a coincidence that that they did that. That wasn't a reference to.
No, it may have been ironic if they didn't mean it. This is how we turn the tables on our guest. But even if they had known about the birth of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy around the corner, they didn't even actually become famous until really the late 20s. They came together and they practiced a little bit, but it wasn't the late 20s, and they lasted till about the mid 40s, right through the close of World War II, where their disagreements got the better of them.
And you can see that story in theaters now in Stan and Ollie, which is a great movie.
Really?
At the time of the recording. You have no idea when someone's actually listening. This could be 5 years from now when someone first listens.
True. So in 2019...
There we go.
By the old calendar before the world ended.
Now available on whatever has replaced Amazon.com.
In the year of our Lord before the third age.
Exactly.
Well, did y'all watch Laurel and Hardy when you were kids?
I was a much bigger
Yes.
Abbott and Costello fan. And I only saw a couple of Laurel and Hardy's, and it usually was the same channel that would show reruns of the Three Stooges. And I always got mad because I liked the Three Stooges better. And then every now and then there'd be a Laurel and Hardy episode like, oh, it's not the Three Stooges.
Yeah, that's how I was too. I was a big Three Stooges fan, unless it was Curly Joe. Then I would rather watch Laurel and Hardy. But yeah, I never really got into Laurel and Hardy.
Wait, you didn't like Curly Joe?
No one likes Curly Joe.
Everybody loves
I thought
Curly.
nobody likes Shemp.
No, Curly Joe's
Everybody
fine. Shemp
likes
is the one I don't like.
Right. Curly. Right.
Yeah, everybody loves Curly.
Shemp.
They like Shemp, and they don't like Curly Joe.
I'm not
I'm
big
not a
on
big
Shemp.
fan.
I like for me, the original is Larry, Curly, and Moe.
Yeah, well, and I think that's how everybody thinks of the Three
Really,
Stooges.
I think they had their heyday on stage in vaudeville, and that's all I will watch.
You didn't like
You
any
don't
of
like
the
their
movies?
movies?
I also literally can't watch them on vaudeville, so.
Correct, because that would have been on stage, and unless you had a
Well, I
video
was
camera
gonna say,
back then, that's impossible.
You don't know me.
Unless you're from the future.
How do you think this joke got in here?
You don't know me.
How did you edit that into here? That's not how oh my God, he's magic. For these primitive earthlings, anybody of high origin from a different species would seem a god. Somebody tell the guys from Open the Podcast Door we got a 2001 reference happening, but very sloppily.
Yeah.
Well, they have an interesting career because they were in 107 films over about 18 or 20 years. And so they were really cranking them out.
Well, when you say films, that actually includes a lot of their
Well, there were
shorts, which
32
really
short
full
silent
length.
films and 40 short sound films, 23 full-length features. So, I mean,
There you go.
that's still more than a feature a year.
They also continued to do stage performances long past the time they were doing film,
That's crazy.
which is what Stan and Ollie is about, is that last tour they did together in England. And they were getting a bit old.
Mm-hmm.
So was that after they had kind of mended fences, or was that?
It's when they kind of mended it, because they were stuck doing the tour together and then were having problems. And so the movie starts with the time when they got separated, and Ollie did a movie without him, without Stan. And so that resentment comes back in the main plot of the film.
Oh.
I had to double check. Stan Laurel's also buried near here.
Oh, really? In California?
Been to his grave. Yeah. Yeah, he's at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills.
Really?
It's a few miles from here.
That's pretty cool. Have you been out there?
Yeah. I had to double check which one it was, because I'm like, I remember going to the grave and it was Laurel and Hardy, but it's Laurel.
Well, and Stan Laurel is from England, so I would assume he's buried there.
No, it's Stan Laurel who's buried here.
Oh, Stan Laurel. Where is Oliver Hardy?
Please stand by while our woefully unprepared guest and hosts try to buy themselves some time to figure this one out.
Live Googling. Also in Los Angeles at Valhalla Memorial.
Oh.
But they were both married to people here, so I guess that'd be why they
Oh,
buried
that would
here.
make sense.
All right. Well, I've got a letter I want to read if we're going to talk about these guys, Laurel and Hardy, since that's the joke that's being referenced. And I thought this was a pretty cool tie-in to some of our other favorite, or maybe one of our other favorite movie franchises. I don't know where Robert falls on this, but we'll find out by the end of this letter. But from Los Angeles, dated June the 3rd, 1961. And it was a letter that starts off, Dear Mr. Laurel, I meant to write you immediately after you received your so richly deserved recognition from the Academy, but was unable to trace your address immediately and then got caught up in my work and forgot. But now someone has got it for me. Unfortunately, I leave in about 4 days' time returning to England, and I have looping, etc. to do at the studio. Otherwise, I would have loved to have called on you. But I will try to reach you on the telephone before I go. Your Academy Award gave such tremendous pleasure to everyone, but it was a particular joy to me. For me, you have always been and always will be one of the truly greats. I think one of my earliest ambitions was to emulate you in some way, and certainly one of my first successes, although a modest one, in the theater playing Sir Andrew Aguecheek in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, rather on the lines you might have played it. I was only 23 at the time, and I think the copying of you was unconscious, but it was certainly noticed by the critics, and that goes to show how much I had absorbed and loved your work. Anyway, this brief letter is just to pay homage to a great comedian and to wish you all the happiness and the hope that I might meet you someday. Yours sincerely, Alec Guinness.
Oh.
So, Alec Guinness, our favorite Jedi, among other great roles, by the way.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
Alec Guinness recognized that he himself, as a young lad on stage, emulated some of the mannerisms and stylings of Stan Laurel when he was learning his craft. And I thought that was kind of a cool little tie-in to our friends from the Star Wars world and the fact that Star Wars made such a huge impact on, I think, all of us.
Yeah, and I'm trying to picture what it was that he was emulating, because it's hard to see him in Alec Guinness's work.
Well, in the role of Shakespeare's Sir Andrew Aguecheek on stage, talking about Twelfth Night, a particular performance, which he is sort of a beanpole, kind of a goofy-looking character, or goofy acting character. He's sort of a simple character. He's part of this comedic subplot, as apart from the main story of Twelfth Night. So I could very easily see it, that the mannerisms of Stan Laurel would be perfect for Sir Andrew Aguecheek.
Okay.
You'll have to take my word for it, being the only guy here that has directed Shakespeare. I think, Robert?
I have directed Shakespeare now.
Okay, there we go. Just making sure.
Now, if you'd like a tangent upon a tangent, great thing about Alec Guinness that I like. Have you ever seen the movie Mute Witness?
No, I haven't.
The main character is, she can't speak, and it's like sort of a horror film structure, but she can't like scream, and people are trying to kill her because she witnesses a murder. In 85, the director met Alec Guinness, and he's like, I'm dying to get you in a movie. And he filmed a scene with him, but hadn't made the movie yet. And didn't end up making the movie until 1995, like a decade later. But Alec Guinness had done this scene for him and didn't take any pay for it because he was like a fan and he liked him. Like he loved Alec Guinness. And so he's like, sure. And he uses the scene in the movie as like, he's like the boss above the boss of the bad guy. And so he's one little cameo scene filmed a decade earlier because he was nice. It's really cool.
Wow. That's cool though. And by that point he had already been knighted. So it would have been Sir Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Great story.
Back to Laurel and Hardy.
All right. Getting back to Blazing Saddles then. We're past the Laurel and Hardy joke. We see Samuel Johnson uses a big green flag to signal to, I guess, Gabby Johnson, who we see up on a rooftop as a lookout.
Yes.
So why do you think that he waited until the last minute like that to read his, to prepare for his speech? And why would he be doing his speech rehearsal in front of the audience?
I just got a telegram from the governor's office. The sheriff will be here at noon. Noon? I better rehearse my speech. As honorary chairman of the Welcoming Committee, it is my privilege to extend to you a Laurel and Hardy handshake.
Because we wouldn't hear the Laurel and Hardy joke otherwise.
And then we wouldn't have anything to talk about in this minute.
That's true. It's thoughtful of them to give us those lines to discuss in our podcast.
I mean, come on, Walt. If he didn't say those lines, what were we going to talk about?
Otherwise, we're just discussing why they named each Johnson what they named him.
Well, and there's a tuba and a trombone. We could talk about the origins of the tuba and trombone.
All right. I'm not going to do that, guys. All right.
Tuba talk with the Wilder Ride.
The tuba was invented
by Tuba Johnson, ironically.
God, no, it wasn't. And we're done. And we're not talking about tubas. And we're not talking about instruments. We're not talking about the band. I said he raised the green flag for Gabby Johnson.
Okay, so why do they need a lookout on the roof?
And why is he looking sideways?
Because they want the music to play before he gets there. It's a whole thing. They do it for every new sheriff.
Well, this is the first sheriff that's actually been appointed. Usually they find somebody from the town.
Oh, they did say that, didn't they?
Yep.
That ruins my whole list of dead sheriff scenario.
All right. Robert, you're really good at doing stuff like this, the geography of the movie, especially when you're breaking down the Michael Myers Minute about where rooms are, inside, outside. From where the band is, the camera angle suggests that they're looking up and to their left, basically, toward where Gabby Johnson is, which you would think is at the very front of the town.
Yes.
So if he's at the highest building at the front of the town, why is he looking sideways off to the side rather than where the sheriff is supposed to be coming? I mean, based on the little edge of frame, he's staring at the edge of another building.
Two options. Gabby Johnson is stupid, or Gabby Johnson is brilliant, and he's the only one who knows how to actually see the approaching road.
I've never been bothered by this until breaking this movie down, but it doesn't feel like he's looking out. It looks like he's looking sideways so we can get this peripheral shot of him instead of where he would actually be looking.
That is kind of weird. I've never really thought about that, but you're right. He would not be looking in the same direction. And the sheriff's not coming up a road. He's just kind of coming through the desert.
Right. But if you look through the telescope, we get the POV shot through the scope. You see the edge of one of the buildings. So again, where's that building? Because the edge that you see him when he's standing in the profile shot, the building that he's looking at is gray, but the building in the other shot is a little bit more of a brownish tan color. So it's a different building altogether. So I have no idea where Gabby's looking.
I don't think Gabby knows where Gabby's looking.
Well, he sees him. I mean, it's in the POV shot.
Well, and we do see through the scope that he is actually looking at the sheriff. So that's a good plus.
I guess it just feels like it's more staged for camera than it is in reality with the geography.
It's clearly right. I think we can trust Gabby. And the building he's on is a corner building as well. because the roof, the little part of the roof that sticks up next to him is at a different angle than the side of it. So he could be looking at a weird angle down the street past that building.
I got an extra question too. If you go to about second in this minute that we're looking at, right after he looks through and says, "Yep, the sheriff's coming," and it comes back to the central town where you've got the welcome sheriff sign, there looks to be like a 2-story house in the background that doesn't seem to match the architecture of the rest of this Old West town. Almost like it's a side lot on Warner Brothers Studios used for a different time period. Did you ever notice that, Walt?
I just noticed that now that you mentioned it. I've never noticed that building before.
Everything to the left looks like the typical, Old West town, the Old West, architecture and style of building. You've got some people at the balcony that are looking on. It's a 2-story building. And you've got the folks in the central, right in the middle of the frame on the dais up there. They're all getting ready to welcome the sheriff. And you've got the band in the bottom right. But over their shoulders on the far edge of screen, that looks way too modern for what would be in Rockridge at this time.
Yeah, that house, that design would exist, but it'd be really unlikely to be in the West.
Right. This is something more of a East Coast town almost. It doesn't feel like it fits in this style of architecture of the rest of Rockridge.
Yeah, it kind of has that New England look to it, and it's got 2 chimneys in it. So the house from a time period setting, I guess, is okay because you would have fireplaces for heat. But
what backlot was this filmed on?
It was on the Warner Brothers lot.
It's Warner Brothers? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because that building also has like a Widow's Walk kind of railing up there too, which would be a coastal
right.
house.
It reminds me of something you would see more in Boston.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe that this angle is an angle that is revealing that there's another side street for a different, built set for outdoor shots for a different area or a different time period. Certainly not Rockridge.
Yeah, you could make the case for it being there, so it's not horrible. But yeah, it doesn't. When you freeze it, it does look out of place.
Yeah, it doesn't look weird when you're watching the movie in real time. But when you're an idiot and you pause, you're like, wait a minute, it doesn't look right.
Movies weren't meant to be paused. Well, most movies.
Nope. Right at second 51, we hear
Crack up the band!
and these guys starts playing. As I mentioned, the name of this song is actually part of the soundtrack that was made for this movie, and it was called Hoop-De-Doo, and actually was a studio band that played this, and it's part of the soundtrack, and it is available. When you actually Shazam the song, it does bring up the 40th anniversary edition cover of Blu-ray cover of Blazing Saddles.
Oh, interesting.
So they strike up the band, and by the way, right when they strike up the band, I guess they decided to ring the bells too, because we hear the church bell start to chime off to, I guess, alert the town.
Well, the Reverend tells them to. The Reverend says, ring out the church bell. And then Olson says, strike up the band.
Between the two, they really want to give a laurel and hearty welcome to the new sheriff.
Which is ironic.
Okay, so the Warner Brothers Ranch facility is located right near the CVS on Hollywood Way, North Hollywood Way.
Yeah.
And it is a very tight lot. So you probably would have you would have a difficult time shooting and not getting some other exterior in.
Yeah. I do want to get to a couple of script changes for this minute. We mentioned yesterday, and our guest Robert mentioned that the costume was changed versus what was conceived in the script, because Black Bart is supposed to be riding across the prairie, decked out in spectacular duds. He is wearing a sensational white suit cut in Doc Holliday fashion. He sports some violet shades, wears a dynamite Stetson, and his boots are fashioned of white lizard. He moves like a moist dream across the prairie, his horse stepping out tastefully to the big band beat of the Count Basie band. As Bart moves out of the frame, we see up on the prairie the entire Basie orchestra, the Count himself, seated at the 88. Then we cut to a master shot of Rockridge, Gabby looking through his telescope, and he sees a stagecoach being held up. He shifts the telescope to the opposite horizon. Through the telescope, an indistinct shape on the horizon. So he doesn't mention anything about the stagecoach being held up. He sees on his own a figure approaching from the other side. They kind of rearranged the order a little bit, and they got rid of some stuff, some of the gags that probably would have slowed down the action of the sheriff's approach.
I'm glad they cut that out.
Yeah.
And Robert, you mentioned, I think yesterday, that this movie does move pretty quick, and it moves a lot from joke to joke and scene to scene. But I think it also, at times, if you go by the script, it could have been the complete opposite, and it really could have drug, and it almost could have had too many small jokes in it.
Yeah, which Mel Brooks at the time was good at not doing. He didn't do too many jokes. Some movies like this, especially in like the 90s, would get really bad with that, where like every shot had a sight gag in it or some sort of joke. And this is more controlled and better for it.
I think this is one of those things where go ahead and write everything in your script, but I'm glad they pared it down. Whether they shot it and removed it or decided, as we found throughout the course so far of these first 26 minutes now, 27 minutes of the film, they actually have been doing a pretty good job of paring down some of the extraneous jokes, some of the extraneous visuals, and it really is a streamlined film.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and it seems like most of the humor, I mean, there's some dumb jokes in it, but most of the humor is pretty smart, and it seems like they did drop out some of the really kind of nonsensical and dumber stuff.
Well, and don't forget, this would have been one of those things where we've already seen this gag that they left out, because when we cut to the very first time we meet Hedley Lamar, there was supposed to be a stick up outside of a stagecoach, almost like there's this constant stagecoach being held up wherever we go. And that wasn't, of course, in the movie. That was only in the script.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So that could have been an ongoing gag, I guess, that every stagecoach gets held up along the way.
I mean, it's funny to conceive.
Which could be funny if they put it in the right place.
I think we are all chuckling at the idea of like, oh my God, every time somebody looks up, there's a stagecoach getting robbed.
Yeah.
You know, kind of a statement of the Old West, you know, or our impression.
And they never do anything about it because it's just what happens.
Right. And nobody does anything about it. Because, I mean, the first time it's mentioned in the script, we're basically in the capital of this region. I don't know, we're not in a state, but it's definitely a territory. But it's where the Attorney General's office is. It's where the governor's office is. It's where the hangman is. And to find that there's somebody being robbed basically at gunpoint right there in the streets and nobody's doing anything about it, you know, people just walking by. By itself, it's funny. Imagining it's funny. But I think in terms of the story of Black Bart, I don't know that it really works.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that not being in there. It just seems a little clunky.
Yeah, a little clunky. All right. Well, we are at the end of the minute here, where the last thing we saw is a very distant shape on a horseback, and Gabby Johnson just noticed that there was a rider coming, and he just assumes that's the sheriff coming, but we're not getting a really good look at him, at least not just yet. Unfortunately, this is where we end the minute, but before we take care of some additional business, Robert, you are our guest. Did you have any other things you wanted to bring up in this minute?
Two things. One, when I realized where this minute ended, I was like, oh, I'm missing one of the best sound gags in film just by seconds.
By mere
the timing,
moments
yeah,
coming your way tomorrow.
The more serious thing, though, is I keep wanting to bring up, because when I did my month of Westerns in my blog, I used Will Wright's book, Six Guns in Society, which is like, he looked at the structure of Westerns. And this Western fits like the first few steps of it pretty well, because like the hero enters the social group and he's unknown to society. And then, the hero is revealed to have an exceptional ability, and the society recognizes the difference between themselves and the hero, which this scene is at number 4 right now. Like, they realize he's black and it goes south for a moment until he does something clever.
Until he shows himself to be the hero they need.
Right.
I think structurally, whether it was the cinematographer who we talked about, Joseph Barak, who had such an amazing career, whether it was the writing team ahead of time that conceived the notion and had some really intelligent jokes, as well as some of your baser, more, fart gags literally in the script.
Yeah.
This really is, up until the last 5 or 10 minutes, it is a classic Western for storytelling.
Yeah. Structurally, it is. Until it deliberately isn't.
And I think that's good because it keeps this movie, we said this yesterday, it keeps the movie timeless. It fits that view that even today, if we do a Western, it's not going to look like 2019. It's going to look like whenever we set the Western, 1870, 1860, 1880, anywhere in that time frame. And it's all Westerns that, if they're set in this time period, will all have a similar look and feel. So it doesn't feel dated. It feels like we're watching a classic, and yet it could have been released today.
But one thing, and Robert, I'd like for you to kind of chime in on this. One thing about Westerns that I've found as I've been preparing for this is that very few of them were really very accurate. And our understanding of Western history is more true to the Western movies than it is to actual history. And in some ways, this movie may be a little bit more accurate because of the intermixing of African Americans and Chinese people and folks like that, where most of the older Westerns are basically all white with a few Indians thrown in and maybe a Mexican thrown in from time to time.
Yeah, but don't forget, if there were Indians, they were probably played by Italians.
Oh, true.
The same thing. That, yeah, even the Indians and the Mexicans sometimes weren't Indians and Mexicans playing the parts.
Which I think we'll see a scene later on, I think, where Mel Brooks takes a nice shot at that.
Yeah. And you have to. If it's a comedy about a Western, you have to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really never understood that that's what he was doing until I started preparing for this.
Yep. I mean, he's pointing the finger back almost at Hollywood, saying, shame on you for not doing it the right way.
I think if they had been more accurate with their history, it really honestly might have helped race relations to heal faster. Because instead of people getting an accurate understanding of what the West was like and what the lives of the people in the West were like, they got a version that was very white American.
Well, that's on purpose, too. It was Hollywood making that, and they were producing, sort of writing American mythology. So they're producing I was just doing research on, it was Los Angeles, when it first became a thing in the early 1900s. It was advertised as a white city. But there were tons of Mexicans living here, tons of natives and other races. But when they advertised to get people to come here, they called it the white spot. And it was a big thing. But that is not what you got when you came out here. But that's how they advertise it. And then in the Western, they're creating this idea of this was like the white, previously European male coming and conquering the wild and conquering the natives, depending on the film. And sometimes having to conquer other white males because that's, just natural conflict between people.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly an interesting commentary that while Mel Brooks is out there trying to deal with social commentary of 1974, that whether purposeful or ironic actually had a more accurate depiction of the diversity of the West than almost any other Western up to that point.
Now, unless I get up the gumption to do one of my favorite movies is a Western, and if I wanted to break that one down sometime in the future, this might be my last time to talk about Westerns. So I have something else for you serious if you want to hear it.
Sure.
It's actually, part of it is a quote from my blog. One of the last days I was writing about the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Great movie, by the way.
So it's Groundhog Day Project, day 699. It's called Guerrilla in a Civil War That Never Ended. And it said, imagine, if you will, that the Western is a living thing. It was young once and it had fun. Stagecoach. It didn't worry about some of its racist or sexist undertones, The Searchers, or how readily it reified and reinforced patriarchal and imperialist/colonialist notions. about how the world worked. It sometimes sang and it sometimes glorified violence. It had its adolescent period, figuring out what it was about, dealing in post-war storylines, 3:10 to Yuma, to deal with a different post-war world. When President Kennedy was killed, not long after Liberty Valance was, the tone of the Western changed a bit, like it needed to exercise its own violent tendencies, the Wild Bunch. But it was also coming to understand more of the world outside itself. Violence was all well and good, and it did get things done, how the West was won, but violence was also destroying the world, had already destroyed the way of life of many of the natives the Western used to portray so simplistically. It became thoughtful for a bit, a man called Horse, and maybe this was the equivalent of its 20s and 30s, trying to be a grown-up, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, but just still wanting to play Blazing Saddles. And Leone's deconstruction was part and parcel of that, rethinking all the ridiculous ideas that arose in adolescence. It settled in, let other action films take over the exciting stuff, not that The Outlaw Josie Wales is unexciting, and it wanted to be young again. Like anyone getting older, it acts younger than it really is, young guns, and hopes that acting dictates reality, but all it gets is evidence that it has gotten old, unforgiven. Creaky bones, sore muscles, it reminisces about old stories and rewrites its own history to move past old playful imaginings, Tombstone. But it also tells new stories, The Quick and the Dead, remixes old ideas to pass the time, Open Range, and the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is like the melancholia that sets in when the Western realizes that it might actually die. That's the quote. Now beyond that, I would say that Blazing Saddles is more than just the Western playing. It's got satirical takes on racism, on politics, on moneyed interests taking over, which is a staple of many a Western. But with the four-wall breaking moments, and especially the ending, that acknowledges itself explicitly as a film among many films, it suggests something about the Western, about American cinema that goes beyond genre. And on the one hand, the Western is a quintessential American genre, however much others took its parts and used them. And it invokes the frontier mentality. It invokes the frontier mentality of Americans even to this day when we no longer have a frontier. On the other hand, the Western conflict overtakes the other movie set at the end of the movie. It overtakes the commissary and it spills out into reality itself, which suggests a sort of like Mel Brooks commentary on American culture, on the world, and how the Western affected American culture, and how we essentially, like Walt, you're saying, like Westerns have that problem. They're creating a white world, but that was what American mythology was creating for itself. It took us a while to get over that, and the Western held on to it. And the ideas are so big that this little movie, like, deliberately cannot contain them, and so it spills over. And that is why, as I said, I think it was yesterday, I don't come back to this movie much, but I love what it's doing because of that ending.
That was awesome. I loved the using the dropping in of certain examples of Westerns along the way to go along with the lifespan from birth through adolescence to a teenage and early 20s into their 30s, 40s, and then toward the end of their life. I thought it was really well done.
That's what happens when I watch 42 Westerns in 32 days.
Well, it is actually one of my favorite genres. It wasn't when I was a kid, but as I got older, I really appreciated the stories that were being told. And I definitely have become more of a Western fan in time with Hollywood recognizing more accurately portray the West. So a lot of the movies that I like do tend to be more of the newer, more gritty, more realistic portrayals of the West, even though I kind of fancifully like some of the older ones just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
But I do like the Western genre. And I think things like Deadwood that was on Showtime and other, up modern takes on the Old West, even if it may take liberties with language at times, I do enjoy the revisiting with maybe an eye toward correcting some of those historical inaccuracies that existed in the 50s through basically the mid 70s.
Yeah.
Well, that was a great way to end your stint with us here on Blazing Saddles. I don't think anybody's going to have a thesis. I mean, I don't think we did invite Sean German, so we might have another one to compete with you.
Yeah, brace yourself. Sean German's coming.
They don't have to have us both on the same episode.
The Germans are coming? Wait, the Germans are coming?
No, just one of them.
Well,
just one. That's all.
It's very appropriate for a Mel Brooks movie.
Anyway, Robert, that has been awesome, and I really appreciate you being here with us. This is your second appearance with us here in this season, and the last appearance with us here on Blazing Saddles. So, you've kind of said your final farewell to the movie and to the genre of Western. But if somebody is interested in some of your future projects, including whether or not you might have decided to do a Western along the way, where can people follow you?
The easiest way to find out ahead of time what I'm planning is to go to lemmingdrops.com. That's lemming like the animal, not lemon like the fruit. And that'll have links to my Groundhog Day Project blog, my 2 podcasts so far, Michael Myers Minute and Dave Made a Minute. And it will have a link to the upcoming The Room Minute once I get the pilot up.
Fantastic. And some really, really good stuff. Great analysis, and you're always a fantastic guest. Walt, where can people learn a little bit more about us?
Well, they're going to want to go out to facebook.com/The Wilder Ride and join our listeners group. First, you'll like the Wilder Ride group, then hit the button and join the listeners group. And you can see great things like some of our listeners like Robert going out and taking pictures of Monster Bookstore and what was the other place there?
Shoe Palace.
The Shoe Palace, which was one of the shooting scenes from Young Frankenstein when we were going through that. So there's some great discussion, great stuff getting added to that page. So take the time to go join. And one thing I would like to encourage everybody to do is if you have friends or family who might enjoy listening to our show, please reach out to them and let them know about us. You can invite them to our group. You can point them to our episodes. We actually had a friend of mine who's a arts teacher at one of the local high schools asked me to send some of our episodes that were talking about black and white films from when we were going through Young Frankenstein. So I forwarded those on to him. So take that opportunity. We'd really appreciate that. That'll help our listenership and hopefully entertain some folks.
Excellent. And come back tomorrow, folks, because we want you to continue on with us. We are obviously going to be greeting the sheriff to the town of Rock Ridge, and we have a very special guest coming up for a couple of minutes this week. We're going to be visited by Father David Mowry, who will be with us to talk about Gabby commenting on the roof, about whether or not the sheriff is near, and we will end with the welcome sign magically rolling up all on its own. But for that, for Hump Day, you've got to come back tomorrow for this, The Wilder Ride.
I guess we're going to have to be on our best behavior for tuba and trombone discussion with a priest coming in.
Did you hear me when you had an actual minister join us during Young Frankenstein?
Well, I know him, so I was unfortunately not on my best behavior.
I didn't.
Surprise!
Yeah, boy, I can't wait for Father Mowry. Actually, he requested these minutes simply because of the scene when everybody decides to pull the gun and he holds up the Bible and then eventually, even though he's the leader of the flock, abandons the person. Son, you're on your own.
Hey, there's a point where even the best among us give up.
But come on back. All right. Well, we already did that. So we're on this is that.
Get out.
Okay. Get out.